Boy, it sure has been a while since I've done a proper theory review. And yet, all those theories keep getting sent in. So today, I've decided to give back to my community, the Deltarune fanbase that is, because I've taken a solid month making videos like 6-7 Theory, Toy Story Cognito Hazard Theory, and I've kept you all waiting. Today, I'm going to be reading and reviewing 30 of your theories that you sent to me. Let's not waste any time, and let's jump right into this. Actually, let's not, because first, I have a pretty big announcement. Recently, you may have noticed that I've been trying to branch out with my videos, and it's because I'd like to turn YouTube into what I do full-time, and that's why I've decided to start a Patreon page, and I'm doing it in a pretty unique way. The $3 tier on my Patreon has access to all main channel videos ad-free 2 days before they come out, unless it's a smaller news-based video, like if a newsletter were to release. All patrons get their names in the end of all of my videos. All patrons get access to tons of content. This is the unique thing I was talking about. I've always wanted to do a second channel where I talk about all kinds of stuff. I want to rank the Mega Man X games. I want to talk about all the horror movies I watched this month. I want to talk about games that I play. I want to do playthroughs and all sorts of other fun variety content. The big idea with this Patreon page is that this is where I can put loads of unique variety content. Currently, there are 3 videos uploaded to the Patreon page. A video of my playthrough of the Sans Pacifist battle from the 10th anniversary that's 20 minutes long. You know, with something like the Knight, that fight goes on very long, and I got really close once or twice after like 6 or 7 minutes. And then a Halloween Horror Nights discussion video where I talk about all the scare zones and houses that's over an hour long. The main type of scare throughout this house, though, was the animatronics themselves. From what I understand, they were a mixture of actual animatronics and a 40-minute relaxed, unscripted discussion video where I talk about my thoughts, expectations, hopes, and more for Deltarune Chapter 5. So thoughts on Chapter 5 is I'm way less excited than Chapters 3 and 4. Okay. All of that is available for patrons, and I will put out fun variety content like that constantly. Not only that, but at the beginning of every month, I will post on the Patreon asking for you guys' Deltarune theories, and all patrons who send a theory will have their theory reviewed in a Patreon theory review video. But that video won't be stuck on the Patreon page, I'll then upload it to YouTube as well, so your Patreon theories can be seen by everyone. Don't worry, these videos won't replace these theory review videos, they're extra. Finally, the $5 tier for if you really want to support me includes everything from the previous tier, and I will also especially shout out your name in the end of every video. The Patreon page is live right now, link in the description. Thank you so much for being willing to support me. So without further ado, my name is Spookydood, make sure to like and subscribe and become a member on Patreon. Now let's discuss. Starting off with a theory from Zing. Susie is the second voice that interrupted the Gonnermaker in the beginning of the game, because she is the Pen of Hope. This is a time loop theory, with the theory stating that we are actually on a rewrite of the original story. Basically, in the original story, it was the vessel that took the burden of the soul and descended to become the angel. In this rewrite, Kris is the one that's now taking on the burden of the soul. Susie is the one to put all of this into effect, because she's the White Pen of Hope. She is actually the writer of the prophecy. So the original story involved the vessel. This rewritten one by Susie involves Kris at the center instead. I think there are elements to this theory I actually do really like, specifically the idea that Susie being the White Pen of Hope ends up being the author of the prophecy. Now, there are a few problems with this, but I'd just like to talk about it for a second. One of the scenes that really spoke to me during the recent release was when Kris and Susie were walking through the second sanctuary, after Susie opened up about her experience with the piano and everything, and she starts talking about how meaningful it is to be a prophesized hero. She says she's never really been picked for anything before because she wasn't good enough. She's thrilled to be called the girl with hope crossed on her heart. We've spoken about how it's weird that the prophecy references Lancer and Jockington in the past, especially considering how hyper-specific those references are to our adventure, compared to the more vague entries. But if this theory turned out to be true, it would make sense. The original adventure involved the vessel, with Kris playing another role. Susie reached the ending and through some means rewrote the story, rewrote the prophecy, sending us into Kris instead of the vessel. Coming back around to my point with that whole thing about Susie, that would mean that not only was Susie picked as the girl with hope crossed on her heart, she's the hero who saved the world through rewriting fate. This prophecy feeling like something that's bigger than all of us actually being written by Susie would be a really cool reveal in terms of what it says about Susie as a character. That being said, I still do have some problems with this theory, specifically that it is a bit complicated. And I'm not sure how that could be properly explained. Also, this would imply that whatever bad thing Ralsei wants to stop, Susie still wrote that into the prophecy. Plus, I feel like the emotional core of this story is going to somehow end up revolving around us defying the prophecy. So it would be really weird if it was like, the prophecy is bad, let's defy it. Oh, we maybe can't? Oh, actually, Susie wrote it, so we kind of can. I definitely get where you're coming from, and the problems I have with this theory aren't exactly with the idea, just with the details, which can easily be changed. The idea that Susie has much more, I guess, metaphysical purpose, the idea that she put something into motion we don't realize yet, the idea that there is some kind of time loop logic being applied, that all makes sense and could end up being proven true. It's just the details here that I'm not too sure about, so for that reason I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10. The next theory was sent from Sumi, and it's pretty nuts. In a good way. Papyrus is the Forgotten Man, or was related to the Forgotten Man in some way. There's tons of evidence to back this up. In Undertale, when you fight Papyrus, it says he's forgettable. When you date Papyrus, there's an egg on the screen. There's Undertale merch with Papyrus behind a tree. The Forgotten Man and Papyrus both speak in uppercase. There's a heart shape on Papyrus's jogging outfit shoulder pads, and finally, Papyrus does talk like a therapist in some instances. Like when he says, "I, Papyrus, will gladly be your friend and tutor. I will turn your life right around." Therefore, if the Forgotten Man was in fact a therapist, it adds some level of believability. Not only that, but in Undertale, Papyrus has 2,184 lines of dialogue. The number 2184 is an angel number, and its meaning is 2184 tells you that when you are making life plans, learn to quiet yourself. Go within and listen to your gut feelings as your intuition always leads you in the right direction. Only you know your true desires and life missions, so make plans and take action in the direction your instincts lead you. Papyrus is someone who always listens to his gut feelings, but Flowey is trying to get him not to. Out of all monsters in the underground, all of whom Flowey knows a lot about, why manipulate Papyrus? This theory suggests that it's because Flowey knows more about Papyrus than we do. Papyrus is the Forgotten Man. Alright, there is a lot to say about this one. First off, I want to say I'm not sure how I feel about the angel number significance. Let's be clear here. It's incredible theorizing. It honestly sounds like something that I would come up with, and I mean that in a good way, but I don't necessarily think it means anything. All numbers are angel numbers, and if you search up any number, you'll get a generally vague explanation of its meaning. Like, say Papyrus had one more or one less line of dialogue. Angel number 2183 means to have strong trust and dedication to finding the right path in your world. You could argue that this is related to Deltarune and the search for some good ending that subverts the prophecy, and how the Eggman might be that path. Angel number 2185 means that all is going to work out in the end, which again could be argued to be a Deltarune-related thing. So I don't necessarily think 2184 is such a specific meaning that it really works. That would also mean that Toby specifically wrote Papyrus's dialogue with the number 2184 in mind, like he specifically set out to write 2,184 lines of dialogue, no more, no less. Which, I mean, while that would be pretty impressive, I don't find that believable. As for the theory itself, outside of that specific point, here's my thought. If you asked me on any given day, do you think Papyrus is the Forgotten Man? I'd tell you no, because to me it's very much like Papyrus Knight theory. There's no way that the character of Papyrus is secretly a big, important, mysterious character when there's no precedent set for that to be the case. I mean, when I say mysterious character, obviously he's a pretty mysterious character because we haven't seen him, but I don't think that he could be someone as big and important and ominous as the Eggman. Why would Papyrus all of a sudden be this weird therapist-type guy who's helped Kris in the past, who's also stuck in the rooms in between and can't always speak? It doesn't make sense, especially considering Sans wants us to hang out with him. For the logistical reasons alone, I have a very hard time believing it. But, and this is a big but, all of the evidence you've provided does in fact line up and bring the possibility of Papyrus Eggman into the spotlight. Admittedly, most of the evidence is just thematic or linked imagery, like the egg in Papyrus's dating screen, the idea that Papyrus is forgettable, but the merch showing Papyrus behind a tree? At the end of the day, while I do not think that Papyrus flat out is the Eggman behind the tree, if it turned out that Papyrus had some link to the identity of the Forgotten Man, I wouldn't be entirely surprised because of this evidence. At the end of the day, there's definitely enough evidence to keep him in the discussion. Whenever we're going to do one of those Identity of the Forgotten Man theory videos, Papyrus will always be one of the suspects. But because of the logistical issues, I have to give this theory a 5 out of 10. That being said, that score is only based on the believability of the theory itself. In terms of overall theory quality, I'd rank it much higher, and I really do like the link to the angel number. This next theory was sent by the guy McLastname, and it states that in Chapter 5, the Floral Cowboy is going to be Asgore himself. Basically, we'll end up meeting a sheriff that acts as the head law enforcement of the Dark World, a cowboy with a southern drawl. That cowboy will be revealed to be the Dark World version of Asgore, who has known about the existence of Dark Worlds this entire time. His behavior will be based on his favorite old cowboy show, spending his free time reliving his glory days as the police chief, easily solving problems for the characters in this fantasy world. As a complete opposite situation to Hometown, everyone in the Flower World will love him and treat him like a hero. This could also allow the game to finally go into what happened to Asgore and give more info on December. Okay, I actually really like this idea. For a while, we've been talking about whether or not there's going to be a cowboy character. I mean, that's like what Woody Theory is. But we've never stopped and thought about whether or not the cowboy character could be someone we knew the entire time. Asgore being a cowboy would be a really cool idea, and I could see it making sense. I think it fits him personally, and it makes sense considering he was the police chief. We've all sort of assumed that he'd be a king, considering the prophecy panel that says the Flower Man trapped in asylum shows him with a crown, and I will say that's probably the biggest piece of evidence against this theory at the moment, but it doesn't render it impossible. Due to the lack of evidence in favor of Cowboy Asgore, I am going to have to give this one a 6 out of 10. However, the idea itself is really fun, and I personally would love to see it happen. I think there's so many different routes you can go there. I think that, honestly, I'd love to see fan designs and music and stories with Cowboy Asgore. What would that be like? This next one is from Maya, and it states that there are at least 2 authors of the prophecy. More so that the prophecy has not just been altered, but added to. The majority of the prophecy is written in rhyme, is somewhat vague, and is poetic. For example, the light and dark, both burning dire, a countdown to the earth's expire. And then when all hope is lost for the tale, the final tragedy unveils. However, once in a while, it'll say something different, like, Jockington grows the beard. The pointy-headed will say toothpaste, and then boy. This language is much simpler than the rest, is extremely specific, and doesn't rhyme. The theory states that in a similar situation to the second speaker in the Gonermaker sequence, there is a second writer to the prophecy. Maya goes on to suggest that there are many possibilities, including Susie being the second writer, with the idea of her being the dragon and the White Pen of Hope as part of the evidence. Maybe at some point the Fun Gang will be able to send a message to their past selves that things can be changed, or something, and that's why there are these strange other sections to the prophecy. I think this is very interesting. I've had a problem with Chapter 4's portrayal of the prophecy since day one, and by problem I mostly mean vast fits of confusion and rage. The first Dark World seems to portray it very simply, it's just a deeper version of Rousey's prophecy. But then the second Sanctuary calls all that into question. It seems like the prophecy could be jumbled up. It seems like it's referencing a different party than the Fun Gang, possibly the Vessel, possibly Noelle. Then we get to the Love Finds Its Way to the Girl panels, which is absolutely positively 100% an allusion to what will end up happening in the Weird Route. Then the third Sanctuary comes along, and there's thousands of jumbled up copies of the panels, and that room with hundreds in the background. Are we meant to think that the prophecy is infinitely bigger than what we saw? That these panels cover absolutely everything about the story ahead, dark prognosticus style? Or are these copies of previous prophecy panels? Who knows? Your point does stand, though. I agree that if the prophecy is in fact meant to be read like a linear story, then it doesn't quite work with the panels like Jockington grows the beard, or Roots. To me, I think that the integrity of the prophecy itself will be called into question later on, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were several writers. Again, I'm not too sure how much I like Susie being one of the writers, unless it's like an endgame thing where she writes her own ending or something to that effect. But going back and being the one who wrote lots of the prophecy we've already seen, I'm not too sure. So I am going to give this one a 7 out of 10. But I do think that the overall point I want to take away from this, and that I agree with, is that, like I said, the integrity of the prophecy will be called into question. Who wrote it, where did it come from, etc. So while I think that Susie might not be the one, like your theory suggests, it could turn out that the prophecy has been altered or written in such a way where there is a writer or a second writer, or there is an original prophecy, because remember Gerson said that stories become something different. So at some point we might find out, oh, there is an original prophecy, and this is Gaster's version, or this is the Friend's version, or something to that effect, you know what I mean? This next theory is from Adrian. The Knight is actually something similar to a D&D Lich. The evidence is the Knight has a zombie undead appearance, as does a Lich. It possesses strong magic tied to a dark force, and the Lich's power of undeath is tied to an object that, if destroyed, allows the Lich to die permanently, known as a phylactery. So what if that's what's going on with the Knight, and its phylactery is the black knife? When the Knight's blade, of which its magic is based on, is chipped, the Knight swoons the party and escapes. This is a really cool idea. Now, I personally have not played Dungeons & Dragons, but I did a little research and there are definite vibes that both the Knight and the Liches share. Through a process some call the Ceremony of Endless Night, an individual's soul is stored in a magic object called the phylactery, and it becomes an undead creature, taking on a skeletal form and wielding great power. Interestingly enough, Liches are able to put mortals in a paralyzed state of hibernation with their minds, making them seem dead to others, almost the same way Kris was sleeping like a zombie. I don't necessarily think that you're that far off base here. While I'm not going to go as far as to say that Detch. I'm all messed up. Des, Lich, Knight, all confusing. Well, I'm not going to go as far as to say that Des was specifically inspired by Dungeons & Dragons liches. There are several ties that make the theory interesting. I do think that the Knight and the liches are, at the very least, very similar creatures, so I'm going to be giving this one an 8 out of 10. Theory 6 was sent by XE, and it states that in the weird route, as a way to try and stop us, Susie or another Lightener will summon a Titan to fight us and Noelle. I think this idea is pretty cool. I'm not sure how much I believe it though, considering I think a sort of Titan invasion is 100% happening on the main route. I don't necessarily think that anybody's going to need to summon one, so to speak. When the roaring begins, I think we're going to have to fight a few more Titans, even if it means just avoiding them or something like that. And on the weird route, I honestly think that by that point, Noelle is going to be strong enough to defeat the Titans single-handedly. So while I think you're heading in the right direction here, I'm more inclined to think that Susie will use some dark power to turn herself into a Titan, or she'll summon up strength and fight us in like a Determination Undyne the Undying style fight. I don't necessarily think she'll summon a Titan specifically, because it would also probably be pretty hard to focus the Titan on us, right? It's just like a big beast that destroys things. That being said, I do like the idea, but I am going to have to go with a 5 out of 10. Theory 7 is from George, or Jorge, I don't know how it's pronounced, and it states that all the Dark Worlds are connected, as they're a massive parallel universe to the Light World. The empty space in between Dark Worlds are the cliffs, but you can mold the Dark Worlds by stabbing into the earth and creating a fountain. So technically, if there were fountains all throughout town, the Dark Worlds would have no cliffs as the empty space is filled in. If you know what I mean. It's almost, the way I was thinking about it reading through this theory is it's almost like a connecting play set. Like, have you ever had those when you were a kid and you had to connect the play sets together and they'd mix? It's kind of like that, Each Dark World is its own thing and they'd link together. That explains why Rousey can sort of teleport through the Dark World, because they're all connected. This is a really good idea, and I will say that it really comes down to your interpretation of the Dark World mechanics, which is, well, at this point, more complicated than ever. Chapter 3 seemed to imply that even without a fountain existing, there was a Dark World there, but the last Thursdayism argument could explain that. That being said, I do agree with you that the cliffs represent empty space not filled out by the Dark Worlds. As we see in both chapters 1 and 3, the cliffs are sort of at the edge of the Dark World, which lines up with what you're saying. I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. Theory 8 is from Gobness, and it's pretty crazy. Warning, Omori spoilers ahead. Skip to this time if you'd like to avoid Omori spoilers and go to the next theory. Alright, I'm gonna spoil it. You're getting no Mori warning ahead. Okay, this theory states that the Knight is actually Kris's trauma demon in a very similar situation to Sunny from Omori, and the creature called Something. Something, as it turns out, is a creature created from Sunny's guilt for killing Mari, and we see that it's not necessarily a singular existent entity. It's a manifestation of guilt. In a similar way, considering we know that Kris and the Knight are somehow linked in unique ways that we can't fully explain right now, it could be that the Knight is a manifestation of Kris's guilt or inner darkness. I think that this idea definitely has legs. It's too early to talk about the physiological makeup of the Knight, seeing that we have no real evidence to tell us anything about it just yet, but I am going to give this one an 8 out of 10. This is totally the vibe I think the game will go for when it comes to the Knight and Kris's relationship and connection to Des. Do I think it's absolutely 100% true that the Knight is a trauma monster made by Kris? No, not necessarily. I think that the Knight has to have some physical form to explain how it moved Undyne in the real world, but I do think that elements from this theory could end up correct. Theory 9 from Ada states that Friend is actually a sort of virus, like a digital virus and not a living creature in the way we think. Friend sort of snuck into Gaster's device, and it's named like other stuff in the device in the same way Trojan malware is. The fact that Friend first appears in the cyber world and its main appearance is in a video game seems to add to this. I like this idea a lot. Admittedly, I have had a very difficult time figuring out how it makes sense that Friend existed inside Noelle's Cat Petters game before Deltarune even started, as he seems to be specifically related to Dark Worlds. However, your suggestion makes sense. If Friend was a sort of computer virus type thing, it explains how he was able to do that. I also really like the meta angle of Friend being a virus that corrupts the device. That's a really cool suggestion, and I'd be interested in seeing how that works on a meta level. That being said, this is one of those cases where I'm going to have to give it a lower score than I want to due to lack of evidence. Therefore, I think this one gets a 6 out of 10. Theory 10 was sent from GameSing. In the Undertale 10th anniversary livestream, when Spamton shows up at Grillby's and you choose between ketchup and catsup, they choose catsup, only for Spamton to frantically look around, as if he's looking for a cat. As if we said, cat, sup, like what's up. The only person we know he'd do this about is Mike. Friend as a cat. Friend Mike confirmed. Okay, this is pretty incredible. Honestly, I love this because it's so crazy that it makes perfect sense. Yes, it does in fact seem that when Frisk says, "Cat, sup," this somehow triggers Spamton to frantically look back and forth. No, I don't think that means that Spamton is 100% confirming friend Mike, but I do think it's interesting that Spamton reacted this way. Perhaps Spamton knows Mike and friend. Perhaps this is all a load of nothing. What I will say is, this is very funny, and I like the theory a lot. I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10. I don't necessarily think this confirms friend Mike, but I do think that it is meant to imply something, and that Spamton's glancing back and forth was because of the reference to a cat. Anyways. Theory 11 was sent by Jims, and it suggests that something happened to Papyrus. Basically, in Chapter 1, Sans asked us if we could watch Papyrus the next day. We remember that, right? When the next day rolled around, he was suddenly busy. Which doesn't make sense. Furthermore, Sans is mysteriously hanging out with Toriel, and if the ketchup bottle in the fridge is anything to go by, we may have lots to do with Sans in the next chapter. This theory suggests that Papyrus either went missing, or something happened to him involving a dark world. Sans then spent the next day, aka Chapter 2, looking for him. There's a chance that Sans witnessed the dark world in Chapter 3 when Susie and Kris ran through the streets out of Kris's house. Sans then realized that Toriel might know something. In Chapter 4, Before We Go Home, that's why Sans just so happened to start hanging out with Toriel, because he wants to ask her about the Dark Worlds to investigate Papyrus' disappearance. This also explains why Papyrus is supposedly busy. Okay, I like the story this creates. That's definitely the strongest point here. I think it's an interesting idea, even if there aren't necessarily anything, there's no evidence to prove it true, or any real hard evidence to kind of like link up this story, you know what I mean? But I think it's interesting that Sans wanted us to hang out with Papyrus tomorrow, and then changed that answer in Chapter 2. My theory the entire time has been that Toby originally planned for us to see Papyrus in Chapter 2, but that was when the full game was going to come out all at once. Instead, he pushed it to a later chapter for reasons. Is it because something about Papyrus is way too spoilery to reveal before the full game comes out? Possibly. I think that it's weird that he specifically mentioned Papyrus being busy on the Steam page. Part of me wonders if it's a sort of official reference, like that it means that Papyrus, being missing will be a storyline or something. Like, the reason for Papyrus' disappearance will be an important story beat, because, it's kind of like an official reference. Time will tell. That being said, I'm not sure I agree with your thoughts on Sans specifically hanging out with Toriel to search for Papyrus. In Undertale, even from the very beginning, there was a spooky underside to Sans that you could see, like I said, from Snowdin. That hasn't really come through yet in Deltarune, and I'd like it to. If it turns out that Sans has been on his own secret mission this whole time, I think that would be pretty cool and help give me that other side to his character that I'd really like to see. But I don't necessarily think that this is how it's going to happen. I am giving this one a 7 out of 10. Theory 12 is from Shellkeeper, and it's a bit of a shorter theory that's more of a talking point, and states that Chapter 5 is going to be quite different than we think. Basically, everyone assumes that Chapter 5 is going to be a big field of flowers, like just a big garden world. We're going to see Asgore, king of the flowers, and the flowers have different personalities and come in different colors. Boom, done. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. The theory states that things will be different, that there will be different biomes or a unique structural setup or something that surprises people. Maybe the Dark World will be festival-themed. Maybe the use of the word asylum indicates that while it will start garden-y, it will actually become a sort of prison or something like that. Maybe Asgore will be king, or maybe he'll be controlled by an evil flower. Maybe there will be honeybee darkners, or other bugs that have something to do with flowers, right? Maybe, something. Maybe there will be an evil Tenna made out of Asgore's TV, or a Grandpa Tenna, or something. Something that surprises people and blows away these somewhat generic expectations of the fanbase. I am giving this theory a 9 out of 10, I definitely agree with you. I don't think that the Dark World is going to be as straightforward as we think. I think that elements like a big prison or an evil Tenna, those are the kinds of things that people will think are super cool, like how Jackenstein was this unpredictable dude that just lived in a closet for Chapter 4. I do think that to some extent we're going to get a big gardeny area. We know that the Forgotten Man is going to be harvesting the wheat, so a wheat field isn't out of the question, meaning a bigger garden or farm isn't out of the question either. Oh, there's another good idea, a farm area. That could be cool. You know what they have on farms? Horses. You know who ride on horses? No, but for real, I do think this is a good idea, and I believe that the 5th chapter won't be as generic as many are expecting. Theory 13 is from Theo, and it states that Asgore is the knight. Yes, Asgore, not Des, is the knight. Asgore has the Black Shard, which might have been the weapon of the Black Knight. The closet held a large person. Asgore could have easily overpowered Undyne in the light world. Asgore is working with Carol. Asgore wouldn't hurt Kris. Asgore lost everything, and even in Undertale he killed 6 humans. The Knight tries to take Toriel and also only appears near Toriel, so maybe it's what Toriel sees in Asgore. A killer. Okay, I think there's definitely elements here that are agreeable, even if the overall conclusion is a bit far-fetched in this day and age of Deltarune theories. Yes, there is a variable called Toriel in the files that changes how the 8-bit black deer sprite looks. Without Toriel being enabled, the black deer looks like a normal deer. Therefore, the appearance of the Knight, it could be because of Toriel, right? I guess that makes sense. Except, in Chapter 4, Toriel leaves the church a while before we seal the fountain, and yet the Knight is still there. Also, no offense to Asgore, but bro does not look like that. I do agree that Asgore taking some sort of dramatic action or being a bit darker than we expect would be cool. Lots of people write him off as a joke character, but I think he's sort of deeper than most people understand. Having him really take a stand in Deltarune would be really cool, though I do not think he's the Knight. In this instance, I think the obvious theory is the right one, as Occam's razor suggests, and December is the Knight. I'm going to have to give this theory a 4 out of 10, but again, I do get where you're coming from with some of your arguments. Theory 14 is from Locatus, and it assumes that Rudy Knight is correct. Basically, why is it called the Roaring? And why would Rudy need to trigger it? Rudy wants to crash the game so hard that your computer is forced to reboot with the Deltarune application still running, giving him a chance to access the code and save deaths. The roaring is your computer rebooting, and the name refers to what your computer does when it reboots. The fan roars to life while the monitor is still dark, aka photon readings negative. I'm going to come out of the gate right here, and I am going to say I have to give this a 6 out of 10. The simple fact is that it's just too conspiratorial without any real evidence. I do like the idea, though, and it's why it's so high, that the roaring could have a more meta meaning, because I have been wondering about why it's called that. But Rudy Knight and the specific idea of Rudy knowing about the roaring, wanting to cause the roaring, knowing about the game's code, etc., is just too far for me to fully believe. Like I said, I like the general premise of the roaring being a more meta idea, but I can't say I fully believe this one. Theory 15 is from Ernie, and it states that my roommate Bert is the Knight. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry, Ernie. Ernie says that the chapter select icons are clearly the main bosses of each chapter, as seen in King, Queen, Tenna, and the Knight. But Chapter 4's logo is different. It shows the Deltarune. It seems to break the trend, or does it? Ernie suggests that when turning it upside down, it actually resembles the Titan quite a bit. This is interesting in and of itself, but it could also have lore implications with the Titan's resemblance to Gaster, further linking him to the Deltarune prophecy. I had to see this for myself, and honestly, yeah, I kinda see it. I ended up finding this Reddit post posted by AstralRose555. It shows the general way you're supposed to be looking at it. A commenter below helped further clarify it, showing the way you're supposed to specifically see the shape differences. Admittedly, when shown in this way, yeah, I kinda do see it. But looking at the actual image of the Titan from the fight, I sort of stop seeing it. I'm not sure, I definitely get where you're coming from, but another sort of annoying suggestion is that maybe the chapter select icons don't really matter, or have that level of specific thought put into them, like they're supposed to be a pattern. Honestly, it seems like Chapter 1 isn't really meant to look like King himself, it's just the spade symbol. Chapter 4 being the prophecy could imply that the prophecy itself is the villain of the chapter, or, alternatively, it's just because the prophecy is important to this chapter. Honestly, that's the answer I'm going with. That the chapter icons aren't meant to represent the bosses, just important ideas, characters, or concepts. For that reason, I do have to give this one a 5 out of 10. I want to do a few rapid-fire ones real quick, as several people have sent me smaller theories that I would feel it doesn't really... I can't totally dismiss them, but there's also not enough to say about them for longer than a few seconds. Theory 16. Lewis suggests that Toby's very recent tweet about a friend playing through Chapter 5 and asking what's the opposite of I Miss Tenna is revealing that there's an antagonistic or evil character that'll be in the chapter and we won't like. A later tweet clarified that the friend was being somewhat affectionate, but still. My thoughts are that you're probably half right. I don't think there's a downright despicable evil character who will show up in Chapter 5 and kill people for the sake of it because he's evil, but I do think that the character in Chapter 5 won't be as lovable as Tenna so easily. Maybe something like Birdley, where he's got an unlikable outer shell with something to love inside. 7 out of 10. 17. Will says HP stands for hope. Undyne has more HP than her less determined counterpart. Asriel, god of Hyperdeath, has the most HP at his most determined. Sans only has 1 HP because he lost hope. The same goes for Deltarune. Will, I like this idea, but I have to go 6 out of 10 here. I think you could be onto something, but I think there are some weird plot holes, like Frisk having more and more HP, even though the genocide route, as opposed to the pacifist route, is not really hopeful. Although they're obviously full of hope and determination, they're the most determined thing in the underground, so why don't they have that HP in Pacifist, you know what I'm saying? Also, in Deltarune, even as Ralsei seems to lose hope, his HP goes up. I personally believe that HP stands for nothing, but if it does stand for something, then yeah, it's absolutely hope. 18. Judson suggests that the Knight is not Des, not Rudy, not Carol, but instead it's its own thing, kind of like the Titans, a dark creature. Not Lightener, not Darkener. I'm going 7 out of 10 here. Here's the thing, the Knight is absolutely Des-coded. I don't think that it's 100% its own separate thing, it has to be tied to Des somehow, but I do not believe it's just normal old Des doing normal old Des stuff. A rudely toot-toot. But instead, some sort of undead Des, or Des corpse, or Des apparition, or Des body being piloted by something, or something else. So you're on the right track here. 19. The Flower Man trapped in Asylum line is misinterpreted. In reality, you know how Azrael becomes Flowey in Undertale? What if Asgore becomes a flower, and he's trapped in Asylum, meaning the body of the flower? I think this is actually a really good idea, and maybe something can take over his body, still making him the boss of the chapter. Also, his body being taken over by something else? Interesting parallels. I'm giving this an 8 out of 10. 20. Anonymous suggests Kris is going to have dialogue boxes in the last chapter of the game when they break from the player's control. Yeah, 10 out of 10 with this one. I fully believe it. At the very least, I think there'll be a point where Kris openly speaks to us. I also think it's a possibility that on the weird route they'll speak to us in a battle or something. If they're not, like, talking to everybody, it's going to be at least us. I completely agree with you here. Okay, now back to some longer ones. 21. Ivy says that through Chapter 4, whenever a prophecy panel is broken, it will reappear whenever you encounter the next prophecy panel. As Ralsei does say, the prophecies cannot be changed. But the one time this does not happen is when Susie punches the final prophecy. Thematically, this is meant to allude to the idea that Susie will be able to change the ending of the story. However, Susie bleeds. This could point to the idea that Susie will sacrifice herself to change the ending. Wow, I really like this one. It's not something I picked up on, but looking back I do agree and it makes total sense. Overall, I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10. I originally stated in my final prophecy video that I think the ending of the prophecy is Kris dying or being sacrificed. Specifically, the girl will shatter the cage. But I think the other way around, or not necessarily Kris killing Susie, but the girl will die, also works too. Overall, I think that Susie making a big sacrifice, I don't know, it would be pretty sad, man. It would be super sad. Like, she went on that whole speech about feeling like she was picked for the first time, and if it ends with her dying while all the other parties involved have, like, darker secrets and a hand in this whole thing they're not telling her, that would just be so catastrophically sad. But either way, I like your theory. Theory 22 is from Gedalia, and it's interesting. Basically, in Chapter 4, you're meant to think that the Knight is Carol. If you dig deeper, though, you notice it's most likely Des. This theory states that Toby originally wanted everyone to think it was Carol, and would later reveal that it's actually Des, but no one took the bait. Therefore, Toby will end up actually revealing it to be Carol to fake out the community and make it a cooler reveal. Here's my thought. I don't think that Toby would make any story decision just for the sake of appealing to the community. He has said that the story has been set in stone for a while, so if it's true that Carol is the Knight, then it must have been that way from the very start. There's no way he'd change it now. Onto your theory, though, I am still wondering about the identity of the Knight. The thing is, like I said, I don't think it's straight up Des. However, there are moments where it shows lots of personality, and I can't help but wonder if it's someone who knows what they're doing and are fully in control. Like when it wags its finger like Sonic the Hedgehog. What is up with that? So if it's true that Carol is the Knight, yeah, I think he's sort of playing a game with the fanbase where he knew we'd end up thinking it was Des. But to be honest, I do still think it's Des. I have to give this one a 5 out of 10. Theory 23 is from James, and it suggests that the large microphone in the mic room is Gaster listening in on us, or some sort of machine similar or related to the device that allows him to hear the outside world. I don't really think this is true, especially because as far as I'm aware, there is no unique file name for the mic image that ties it to the device. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here. I have to give this one a 3 out of 10 because honestly, I think the realistic image of the microphone is just for the joke, with no larger purpose. Theory 24 is from Henry. He states that the reason that the Roaring Knight does not have the freedom motif is because they parallel Kris in some way. Kris is not free, therefore the Roaring Knight, who is probably December, wouldn't have a freedom motif because they parallel Kris. I'm not sure how I feel about this. It is odd to me that the Knight had the crystal. I've seen many suggest that the Knight itself has been handing out the shadow crystals, but that doesn't necessarily make sense, especially when you look at certain things like Spamton discovering the crystals on his own, according to Shawm. The Knight is not like the other secret bosses, so why did it have a shadow crystal? Maybe this ties to what a shadow crystal is supposed to be. I've seen some suggest that shadow crystals are forms when fate is broken in some small way, or when dreams die, or when from love and attachment, etc. Whatever it is, maybe that's why Des had a shadow crystal, because it's tied to the process of creating one, not that she was, like, handing them out or something. I guess I get where you're coming from with the idea that Des parallels Kris, therefore no freedom motif, but I personally disagree. I think a lack of the freedom motif is mostly because the night has nothing to do with the secret boss side quest, or talking to us about freedom, etc. I have to give this one a 5 out of 10. Theory 25's from Jude. Basically, the dating tense theme is heard in Black Knife. Obviously, it's Des, but could we date the night, or some instance of dating tense will be heard later? I'm sorry, Jude, but I am so sorry, but I have to go 2 out of 10 for this one. Frankly, I do not hear it. I'm sorry. I just can't hear dating tense and Black Knife. I think they're just similar beats, I guess. Please don't be mad at me. I just don't think that there's any meaning there. Theory 26 is from Marks, and it states that in Chapter 5, we're going to get an extended date scene on both routes. We'll see Noelle and Susie have a fun time at the festival in a cutscene very similar to Chapter 2 in the pacifist route, and on the weird route, we'll have Kris and Noelle at the festival. Yeah, I have to give this one a 9 out of 10. I do think there's always the possibility of the festival being interrupted or not starting properly or something, but I definitely think this is going to happen for sure. In my opinion, since the beginning of the Weird Route, we've seen references to taking Noelle to the festival, and it's sort of been made into a big deal at this point. I wouldn't be surprised if it actually ends up being a really disturbing scene, like in Chapter 4. You are spot on with this one. Theory 27 is from SlammerTop178, and it suggests that in Chapter 5, we're going to see all the houses and areas of Hometown that we haven't previously been able to explore, especially considering the Roaring is going to start soon, and this may be our last chance to do so. I really think this does seem likely, actually. Here's the deal, you're right. If we don't see in Tutorial's room and all the other buildings, when will we get that chance? I don't really think that we're going to have time for exploration after saving the world. Personally, I think this may be our last chance to run around Hometown and explore, so you might be right. I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10. But, I just want to say, I also foresee another darker route. Maybe we just won't get to see what's in all those houses. Perhaps it's something not meant for us to see. We'll never explore it. That's also a possibility. Theory 28 is a small one from Devon to the Fourth. We'll get the shelter code from Asgore in Chapter 5, after he gives us the police badge, which he probably has, and he probably has written it on the badge. So I think this is a cool idea, and it's a logical way for us to get the shelter code. My one problem is, was the shelter something that started before Asgore left the Force, or was it after? Like, I know it was probably there, but was the shelter this big, important lore thing before or after Asgore was fired? Because if it was before, then maybe he has nothing to do with the shelter. Maybe he doesn't have the code, because, you know, there'd be no reason for him to have it. But if it was after, then maybe he knows. I mean, like, if it was... Sorry. I mixed those up. If the shelter was important before Asgore was fired, then yes, he has the code for sure, and yes, he would probably know what's in it to some extent. If the shelter was important after Asgore was fired, then I don't think he'd have any knowledge of what's in the shelter or anything like that, and might not be able to get us the code. But I do think that this is a very logical way for Chapter 6 to open with the shelter, by having the Asgore-based chapter end with us finding his badge or some other item that he has that has the code written down. Then Susie says, all right, this is it tomorrow, but dang, we gotta go hang with Noelle. Let's go do that, whatever. Boom. And then Chapter 6 is the shelter. I would be so hyped. I give this theory a 9 out of 10. Theory 29 is from Landon, and it's in regards to how Chapter 5 will begin. Sans will open Kris's door, and he'll start his speech to wake Kris up. He'll say it's a beautiful day outside, birds are singing, flowers are blooming, only to realize Kris isn't there. He then notices that Kris must own a bird, and the bird in the cage, aka the soul, clearly wants to get out. He'll open the cage to let it out, and we can then explore as the soul around Hometown for a while, although nobody is around as they're all working to set up the festival. We move over to Flower King and see that a dark world has opened, and while we don't know where Kris is, we still decide to enter it. Thus starts the chapter. Okay, listen, 5 out of 10 because of low evidence, but 11 out of 10 for creativity and storytelling potential. I would love if this happened. That would be so interesting. What would even happen if the soul was taken out in the dark world? We haven't seen that yet, right? That hasn't happened. That is a super interesting question that I don't really think has been shown yet. I definitely think that would be a good way to start the chapter, and honestly, I so hope the chapter opens with Sans. That would be so exciting. I know it's silly, I know he's still sort of a joke character at this point, but everything Sans is just great. I would love it if he woke Kris up. That would be super funny. Theory 30 is from Crazy. No, it's not from Crazy. It is Crazy. It's from Slime. Basically, the weird route is an unusual name. Why call this route the weird route? Unless there's hidden meaning behind it. The Old English definition of the word weird, or wyrd, W-Y-R-D, means fate in Old English. Fate? Are you kidding me? How did we not know this yet? Deltarune has everything to do with fate, and the weird route, as many fans have suggested, is us trying to abide by the prophecy as opposed to breaking it. So it lines up perfectly with us trying to follow our prophesized fate. Therefore, the name Weird Route could be talking about our fate. This is a crazy good idea, and I am going to give this one a 10 out of 10. Even if it's not true, it seems too true to totally write off. Love this one. 10 out of 10 for sure. Well, we have yet again reached the ending of 30 theories. I had a very good time doing this. I like a lot of the theories that you guys sent. I think they're great. They're awesome. I want them to keep coming. If you have a theory you would like reviewed in the future, send them to spookydoodtheories@gmail.com. Or you can subscribe to the Patreon at the $3 tier, where you will be able to submit your theories, like I said, to the Patreon theory review videos, in which those will also get posted on YouTube, so they can be seen here. Thank you so much for watching. Tell me in the comments if you agree with everything I said, if there's any theories you disagree with me about, maybe if there's some that you think deserve higher, maybe there's some that you think deserve lower, maybe you really, really, really like the idea that Papyrus is the Forgotten Man, and I'm just too blind to see it. Let me know. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Spookydood. Make sure to like, subscribe, share the video, turn on notifications, get me on Patreon, write me a letter, tell your local news stations about how good I am. And thank you for watching.